I have long maintained that a man's fortune on Wall Street is not measured by the frequency of his operations, but by the soundness of them. And if you have been a student of my methods for any length of time, you will recall from our previous discussion on the rule that lends predictability to speculation. We established how adhering to a tested framework is what transforms apparent randomness into clear opportunity. Today, I wish to speak on the two most perilous times to engage the market, and more to the point, why I have often kept my capital on the sidelines, waiting with practiced stillness, rather than charging into the fray like an impetuous amateur. Because in this great game, fortitude yields far greater dividends than feverish activity ever could. Let me pose a question. Have you ever felt that compulsion to enter a trade, even when your better judgment told you the conditions were not right? That deep-seated urge that demands, act now. Do anything, because to stand still is to fail. That is the voice of ruin, the internal tempter that urges a man toward his own undoing. And I am well acquainted with him. I have heeded his counsel in the past, and he has relieved me of more capital than I wish to recall. The first instance when a speculator must not trade is when the market itself is in a state of indecision, when it oscillates back and forth without a clear path. That horizontal movement where neither the bull forces nor the bear forces can gain the upper hand. It is like observing a mob, directionless and confused. Shoulders collide, there is much commotion, but no one is leading the procession. If you attempt to plunge into that chaos, you will simply be run over. Have you ever entered a building through a revolving door only to find yourself spinning in place? That is the precise sensation of trading in a choppy, indecisive market. You make a move, you expend energy, but you are returned to your starting point, less your commissions. I came to understand long ago that a period of uncertainty on the tape is the market's clear signal to sit down and observe. When prices refuse to move with conviction, when every small gain is immediately nullified by a subsequent decline, the market is not rewarding the attentive spectator. It is laying a trap for the impatient. And make no mistake, the market has an insatiable appetite for impatience. Now here is the truth of it. I have always held that the market will eventually reveal its intentions to the man who watches with sufficient care. The problem is, most men lack the temperament to wait for that revelation. They grow restless, and restlessness is the very undoing of a speculator. Have you ever considered why the act of waiting feels more arduous than the act of losing? It is a peculiar facet of human nature. A loss is a punishment, but waiting is a form of torture. And yet, it is from the waiting that all great profits are born. So, the first dangerous time is plain to see. Indecision, confusion, no defined line of least resistance. But the second dangerous time is even more insidious. It arrives immediately after you have secured a significant win. That is the moment when your account is flush and your mind is intoxicated with the feeling of success. Tell me, have you ever felt like a conquering general after a string of profitable trades? As if every chart now speaks a language only you can understand, every candlestick a confidential message for your eyes alone. That, my friend, is precisely when the market prepares its sharpest correction for the overconfident. After a major success, your judgment becomes impaired. You are no longer trading the market as it is. You are trading your own elation. You begin to see setups that do not exist because you are no longer searching for the market's true signal. You are chasing the thrill of recreating that prior victory. And victories in speculation are never repeated by sheer force of will. I recall a time after a successful campaign in cotton, I had secured profits that could have purchased a small fleet of motor cars. My self-assurance was at its peak. I believed I was infallible. The very next morning I was back in the action, taking positions with abandon, utterly convinced the tape would once again bend to my will. But do you know what transpired? The market administered a severe lesson in humility for my arrogance. It was like the old street corner shell game. I was certain I knew where the P was hidden, but all I managed to do was enrich the man running the game. Have you ever had a great win, only to hand it back to the market almost immediately? That is the price one pays for hubris. The truth is, the most intelligent move after a great victory is to make no move at all. To step away from the ticker, clear your mind, and allow your pulse to return to normal. Because the market has no memory of your last trade. It does not know you won. It owes you nothing. This is why I contend that the worst time to trade is in the immediate aftermath of a triumph. That is when you are at your least objective. That is when you pose the greatest danger to your own account. Now let us examine the reason. Why do these two periods, uncertainty and post-victory euphoria, so effectively dismantle a trader's account? It comes down to basic human nature. We are creatures who despise inaction. We crave motion. We demand activity. We want immediate results. The market, however, offers no reward for mere action. It rewards disciplined patience. Did it ever occur to you that the greatest fortunes were not built by men who traded every single day, but by men who traded only at the opportune moment? I have seen men who could not sit still lose the savings of a lifetime, while another man who sat patiently through an entire campaign emerged with immense wealth. And this brings me back to what we discussed in that earlier lesson, the rule that makes speculation predictable. That rule is only effective because you are willing to wait for the market to align with its conditions. Predictability arises from repetition, from established patterns asserting themselves time and again. But if you intervene during periods of uncertainty, you are attempting to impose predictability where none exists. Do you perceive the trap? The rule is sound, but only if you respect the market's timing. Jesse Livermore, or Larry Livingston as he was known in print, consistently stressed that Wall Street extracts a heavy cost of instruction for every lesson learned the hard way. Fortunately, the core principles he developed to survive these expensive market penalties were captured for posterity by Edwin Lefebvre in the 1923 masterpiece, Reminiscences of a Stock Operator. It stands as the finest possible literary training ground, allowing you to absorb decades of painful operational experience without ever having to risk a dollar of your own capital. To ensure this timeless wisdom translates accurately to the modern computerized arena, we advise seeking out the Max Davidson Annotated edition. Davidson's careful commentary is indispensable for bridging the gap between Livermore's era and ours. A link to this essential edition is provided in the description below. You must grasp that wealth in the markets is not constructed by capturing every small fluctuation. It is built by identifying the correct major swing and holding on. When I speak of patient waiting, I am not advocating for perpetual idleness. I am speaking of conserving your capital, your mental energy, and your courage for the precise moment when the tape communicates the truth. And the tape always communicates the truth provided you have learned its language. But only a fool demands that it speak when it has nothing of substance to say. Have you ever tried to force a conversation with someone who had no desire to talk? The more you press, the more strained it becomes. It is the same with the markets. When they are not speaking clearly, your job is to be quiet and listen. Silence is always preferable to nonsense. Allow me to make a confession. I was not always a patient man. In my formative years, the ticker tape was a siren's song. Every small movement felt like a call to action. I believed I had to be in the market daily to validate my standing as a trader. But the market does not pay a salary. It pays for correct judgment. And the result of constant trading is, more often than not, ruin. It took me years and more losses than I care to tally to comprehend that my purpose was not to trade frequently, but to trade correctly. There is an old Wall Street adage. The market is never wrong, but opinions often are. I would add a corollary. The market is never in a hurry, but men always are, and it is the hurrying that is fatal. When I reflect on my career, My most significant profits did not come from brilliant entries or split-second exits. They came from sitting through the noise, sitting through the temptations, sitting through the fear and the greed, and most importantly, sitting on the sidelines when the time was not right. So when is the time wrong? Let us simplify it. The time is wrong when you cannot discern the line of least resistance. If the tape is not illustrating a clear trend, you must step aside. The time is wrong when you have just achieved a major victory and your confidence is running high. Step aside again. That is the discipline that most men are wanting in. And that is why most men do not succeed. Have you ever paused to consider why only a small number of speculators become truly wealthy, while the vast majority either struggle or are washed out entirely? It is not a matter of knowledge alone. It is a matter of temperament. The market is a great equalizer of information, but it is merciless in punishing weak nerves. And this is where one's money mindset is paramount. The man who feels he must trade every day is a man who is desperate for income. He views the market as his employer, and so he forces trades to meet his financial needs. But the wealthy speculator, the wise speculator, sees the market as a machine that dispenses payment only when conditions are optimal. He does not plead with it for a wage. He waits for it to present him with a fortune. That is a fundamentally different way of thinking, is it not? Instead of being needy of the market, you allow the market to come to you. Tell me, do you see the immense power in that shift? When you are liberated from the compulsion to trade, when you can afford to sit out the unfavorable periods, you transform from the hunted into the hunter. That is how fortunes are made. Not in the hours of frantic activity, but in the hours of patient observation. And here is the great irony. Most traders fail not because they lack the knowledge of what to do, but because they cannot stop themselves from doing what they know they should not. They see that the market is unclear, yet they jump in. They know they are euphoric after a big win, yet they trade again. And for this, they pay a steep tuition to the market. The real secret, if such a thing exists, is this. Learn to sit tight. Not just on your profitable positions, but on your hands when the conditions are wrong. That is twice as difficult and 10 times more profitable. Because when you wait out the 2 worst times to trade, you preserve more than just your capital. You preserve your confidence. And confidence preserved is opportunity preserved. Have you ever noticed how a single poor trade made at the wrong time can poison your thinking for weeks? That is the hidden expense of impatience. A bad entry during a period of uncertainty or a reckless trade after a big win does not just damage your ledger. It clouds your judgment for the next campaign. Suddenly, you begin to doubt yourself. You are no longer trading the market. You are trading your own fear. That is why I waited patiently. I learned through painful experience that waiting costs me nothing, but impatience costs me everything. And when I say waiting, I mean active waiting. Studying the tape, analyzing the action, preparing for the moment when the line of least resistance finally makes itself known. Not dozing, not daydreaming, but waiting with the coiled readiness of a predator before the strike. Now you may ask, but if I'm not trading during those times, what am I doing? You are doing the essential work that others are too restless to perform. You are observing, you are analyzing, you are building the muscle of self-control. And believe me, that habit is worth more than any individual trade. Because in this game, the largest profits do not belong to the man who trades most often. They belong to the man who makes the fewest critical errors. And the most critical errors are made in those 2 perilous times. So when I tell you not to trade in uncertainty and not to trade after a victory, I am not sharing a theory. I am telling you how I lost fortunes and how I preserved them. I am telling you the truth that the tape whispered to me over and over until I finally developed the wisdom to listen. And in those moments, the tape only whispers one thing. Sit down. Be patient. The opportune time is coming.